This is a run-through of how I hand-built that larger alien creature whose body is covered with sprigs. So in this demonstration, I'll show you step-by-step how I arrived at the end of it and help you troubleshoot any problems that you might have working the same way. So here we go, starting with a reference point that was an earlier sculpture. If you've seen my demonstration on sprigs on a sculpture, this should look familiar here. But this creature, this species of alien creature that I've been working with, is what I'm working with this time again. Only closer to what you see on the right-hand sketch here, where it's rearing up and not on all fours. So that presents its own unique challenges ultimately, as we'll get into. Now, in the way background there, you're going to see a small version of this sculpture, a maquette, and it will appear multiple times. It was just a rough way of thinking about how it would stand up and how it would balance its weight. Beyond starting with a maquette and a sketch and whatever other things you need to lay out in order to figure out your direction, you want to start putting together whatever those starting parts are. In my case, I'm working with coil for most of this. So you'll see me laying out coils at various stages before I actually put them together. So multiple sizes of coils, and then also call them sloyals, like slab coils, flattened coils. Sometimes allows you to gain a little more length and height faster than a normal coil would. Slab as a base for the feet. Then I'm going to coil on top of that. And again, there's the maquette creeping around in the background. Pinched these parts together after I coiled them up. These bulbous forms in the background are going to sit on top of these slabs as a base for the feet. And up we go with the coiling. You see I've got a whole bag of coils in the background, so that's what I'm grabbing from and building up, slipping in between my levels, scoring as well, of course. Smoothing out a bit as I go once I reach a certain length. Just get those coils looking more natural, as you see in that right leg. Then I keep on building. So there on the left, you're actually seeing that other creature that I referenced that I'd already hand built here. It's been fired, but this is the one that we're working on here right now. When I get to the point where the legs are going to come together, I have to work a little bit differently. The first thing I want to do is add something in between just to attach one leg to the other so those don't shift around on me. You'll also notice I've moved from just working freely on them individually to putting them on a board, because I want to be able to turn them on this banding wheel here without anything shaking and moving apart. And this slab up top is helping to prevent those from twisting at all before I add more of a reinforcing pelvis area to it. Now I've built up this pelvic region and lower belly using slabs and coils. If you notice, there's a whole lot of pricks inside, little pin pricks. That's the needle tool that I've been using, just stabbing that inside. Whenever you can do this, is a good idea to do it, because you're creating little vent channels so that everything can evaporate a little bit more evenly. The air can escape the clay. But also, say you had some tiny air pocket like here. If you have a bunch of these pre-poked holes, channels all around it, if something starts to crack, it's going to jump to those spots and hold it in place a little bit better. So in a lot of ways, this helps to alleviate stress on particular thick areas in a sculpture. You don't have to get obsessive compulsive and do this everywhere with every sculpture, especially not when it's small. But if you do have something thicker and you're worried about it a little bit, do those little pricks inside of it, and it will help that out. Continuing to climb as I build up, smoothing out as I go. Looking kind of strange at this point. I'm getting close to where the head will eventually be. Still coils though. Now I'm starting to build out into that head region, the head area, and also thinking about the back. Here's the head close to being closed in. In this left-hand image, you see that I'm adding a coil here for a fold of skin. I have a lot of pre-drawn lines with my needle tool. I'm laying these pieces over the top according to those guidelines. Closing in the shoulder area, where it's just an opening that I had made, now using coils to better define and get a more accurate look to the musculature underneath. Building the arm down to about the elbow, and then looking at this middle photo here, the belly was a little too much, sticking out a little too much, so this isn't drawn over the top. These are actually cuts through the clay. I stuck a knife tool through. You can see by that contrast of light where that's taking the profile down to, and then I just continue to cut that off, leaving me some gaps as you see here on the right hand side, but I'll fill those in. That's not a big deal. It's more important to get the profiles correct. Now I'm using a shear form tool that you see right here. You can buy one of these great little things from Mud Tools. Definitely check out Mud Tools. Their website's great. Lots of fantastic stuff there. On the right-hand side, you see a loop tool that I've modified by carving and filing these notches into it, so it's like a rake. And then I take that over the top and I work down some of those broad strokes that I had made in the hand building process, making them a little more accurate to what I imagine the final look should be. Now, remember this slide, remember this image right here, because this is where I screwed up a little bit, and I'll reference that later on. At this point, when I'm shaving everything down, which you see evidenced by the waste yard of clay scrap everywhere, I still have this rod running up to the head just to prop it up. You'll see at this point I've already moved away from that. I've secured the balance of this thing so that when it's reared up like it should be, it stands on its own power. It's not going to tip over. But that's something I wanted to not chance as I was working up to this point. But now I'm certain of it. I want that out of the way so I can work on the details of those skin folds on the chest region. Then building out those forearms. After the forearms are built, I'm putting in the hands. They look like 4 spears inside of a thin membrane when they're retracted. But you'll see over here in this image, I imagine these things to distend down like fingers, that they come out and they have kind of a bony appendage behind these rounded edges. So I wanted it to look like this membrane over the top of these somewhat bony fingers underneath. So when he's reared up, he's got these hands in front of him looking like they're ready to do something. So those are some of the details I'm working on at this point. Overall, the whole thing is getting smoother and smoother, refining at this point. Working out where the mouth is, and then in the reverse, I'm taking a look at how that skin would bunch up on the back as those arms and shoulders move backwards and rest the weight backwards. I want it to look like it is actually rearing up naturally and standing on its own weight. And of course the sculpture does. Now at this point he's very smooth, there's no decoration across the surface, and I'm going to go in with my sprig molds again and apply those to the surface as the kind of tumorous growths, this patterning that's forming all over the body. So I make a lot of the sprigs first this time around, and then I have a Tupperware container that I keep them moist in with a little wet piece of paper toweling or sponge, so that they're ready to go. I can just plug them on and work quickly, not to have to go back and forth making the sprig, applying the sprig. I want to have them all set. So that's what I'm doing at this point. Now, applying the sprigs. This is a more adult form or a larger form of the creature that you had seen referenced earlier. So I'm thinking about the way that the same similarities and patterning would be shifted around by something having grown, either higher up or more laterally. So there's the back coming together with the sprigs. As usual, I'm working with the details of the sprigs. I mean, this sprig stopped here and here, and then I wanted to connect and continue. So this whole part and this whole part are just a coil of clay added on top, and then I'm using my tools to make it look as if it was a part of that initial design, disguising it. More sprigs. Until I get to this point, on the right you see this new standing creature fully formed, still wet in clay. On the left-hand side, you have the same exact creature, the one that I had shown you on all fours, at that same point, where it's not yet fired, it's just the wet clay. So this is as similar as they will ever look. You see the way that I've thought about that thing being on all fours and then rearing itself back upwards, almost confronting something that's a little bit taller in scale. Now here is the high-fired version of this creature. So I had mentioned some time back that there was a moment with that shear form tool where I screwed up. You're seeing it right here on the head. These cracks that have opened up between the sprigs. The reason why that happened is I broke that rule of consistency in thickness of the clay walls. As I was trying to get that head perfectly shaped, I shaved it too thin. It was very thin right at the front of the head, and now I have these thicker sprigs added in some parts, then very thin clay in between, and they didn't shrink at the same rate in the firing, and they tore open some cracks there. So you can go in with any number of things to patch that sort of crack up, especially if you're doing what I'm doing here, which is cold surface. Not glazing this thing, especially because I've already high-fired it. I'm not doing that part of the process. I've skipped all of that. But if you're going to use something like this where it's got a crack, you want to fill it, you're going to paint it, use something like plaster. If you have plaster available, you can use that to patch something in. It's not the best solution, but it would work. What I used here is a little bit of epoxy, a sculptable epoxy in some areas, and you can also use water putty. You can get it at the hardware store. It's a dry powder which can be mixed with water, and then it sets up really strong. So any of those things will patch those sorts of mistakes, but you want to get those dealt with now. I wouldn't have had to deal with that if I had been mindful of how thin I got, but I wanted to point out that mistake so that you can hopefully avoid that in your own process. Otherwise, it looks the way that I intended it to look. Now, I've already spray painted this whole thing purple and then rubbed in a contrasting darker purple to just give a natural look to the skin underneath. And here I'm painting the sprigs individually like I did with that other creature. Starting with a flat coat, just one kind of color, and then I'll work back in to do the highlights and give it depth. So the patterning is looking the way that I want it to, but it looks flat, so I'll be addressing that next. See that yellow that I'm working on top of it with? That's giving it a lot more of an intense look, a natural look, a little bit more gross to some people's eyes. I'm also going in these other sprigs and continuing the line work, the patterning, and then going over that with the yellow, yellowish orange as well to give it depth. Trying to make these tails and drawn segments look seamless with the raised sprigs. The back. And here it is, all painted. And again, I use a lacquer coat on the final stages, just to give it that wet appearance. But like what I was going for with the other creature, I want these sprigs to almost be distracting. You see this thing, this mass of a creature, but you're immediately drawn to the details. They jump out. They're contrasting in color, almost complementary, close to that. So you focus on those things and those details, and then you sort of lose the forest through the trees. You step back and you see the whole thing. So this one was stoneware, hand-built, using sprigs, spray painted, rubbed in with a contrasting acrylic paint. Then all of those sprigs again were hand painted, same as the lines, those tattoo-like details all around. And then lastly, I went in with a lacquer coat, clear lacquer, just to give it protection and give it that level of gloss and moisture that I'm looking for. And that's the standing space creature. Just as an added reference here, this is that standing creature next to the creature that's on all fours, looking related to one another, just variations in color, and then of course you see the size difference. And that's it.